Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. I think I mentioned last week we need to think about changing the title of this. Friday night Bible study is quite descriptive, but as we noted from asking people to search for it and then doing it ourselves, everybody and his brother puts up a video that mentions Friday night Bible study. So I've been thinking, and I do have a YouTube channel where I put these up, and I put up a short explanatory video on that channel and pinned it so it would always be up on the top, so that people could, if they happened upon the channel and didn't know what it was about, they could play that video. It's, I think, about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And I titled it, "In Search of a Non-Toxic God." And we might use a title kind of like that because what our focus is as we're going through the Bible in these studies is to understand that God is not toxic, He's not controlling, He's not demanding, He's not violent, He's not angry in the sense that we think of anger. He does have wrath, but his wrath is when he lets us get whatever it is we're looking for, despite how destructive that might be for us. But that destruction has its origin in our own desires and actions, and not in His intent or will. God's will is never for anybody to suffer. And so we say that we view God as being not a toxic person or a non-toxic God, if you wish. So, well, yeah, it'll be something to be decided. This is for Friday, August 30th, 2024. And wow. September's just a bit away. Monday, the 2nd of September, will also be Labor Day, so that'll be a Monday holiday, and that'll throw the rest of the week off. Here where we are, school has already started. In other places, school will start technically on the 3rd, since the 2nd is a holiday, the 3rd of September. So, yeah, the year moves on whether we like it to or not. And people's perception of time, as I'm sure you're aware, is pretty much related to how much time they've already spent on this planet. So a child who is 6 years old, a year is 1/6 of their lives, it seems like forever. By the time you're like me, who's turning 70 here shortly, a year is just 1/70th of my life. It doesn't seem that long at all. Anyway, the amount of actual time is the same. It's just our perception of it that changes. I'm looking over there at that light. I just changed the light bulb over there today. You may recall that as they were making their advances in lighting technology, that the compact fluorescent light, or they took a fluorescent tube and wound it into a spiral and turned that into a light bulb that could then be screwed into a standard light socket, came out a little bit before the LED lighting. And because they were supposed to last longer and use a lot less electricity, I figured it made sense to buy them when they started coming out. So by the time the LED bulbs started coming out, which used even less electricity and lasted even longer, I had a lot of CFLs in the house. And the one that I just replaced over there was the last CFL in that fixture. Now, it's the last one, not the last one in the house. I see there's a CFL over here in the lamp that I use when I play the piano to light up the music. So that fixture still has the CFL in it, but the two lights in this room that we use to light up our set here, those now have all LED lights in them. So, whatever you want to make of that. It was my week to be lazy. I mentioned that it had rained a couple of weeks ago. Well, it did, but apparently it wasn't a whole lot. It didn't really soak very well, so the lawn's still pretty dry. There's not a lot of growth to it, so I went out. Normally I would do the lawn on Wednesday morning. I went out during the day Tuesday while I was taking out the trash and bringing the can back after they picked it up, and I just didn't see the need to do anything about it. I will have to do at least one more mowing this year, but maybe next week. And by doing that, then I get out of my every other week mowing falling on the same week as I prepare a sermon presentation. Of course, then it might fall back if longer periods are involved, but we'll see about that. That's not a big deal. I'm retired. I can do both in the same week, and I can do other things still as well, so it's not a big deal. As far as where we are in our Bible study, we're ready to start Exodus chapter 30. There are a couple more chapters of information about the Hebrew worship system and the tabernacle that God instructed Moses to see to its construction. And the actual services that will be held there will be detailed primarily in the next book after Exodus, the book of Leviticus, so called because, as we will read possibly even tonight, the tribe of Levi or Levi, depending on who's pronouncing it, the tribe of Aaron and Moses became the tribe from which the priests were chosen. And in fact, once that choice got made, then the tribe of Levi became a kind of a special tribe and was no longer counted among the 12 tribes. And so the two sons of Joseph became the forefathers of tribes themselves. And so, Joseph now having two tribes, that made 12 without counting the tribe of Levi or Levi. I will usually say Levi. I think that's the way most Jews would say that name. So, but we do say Leviticus, which is closer to Levi than Levi, as the name of the book. But it's so named because it's talking about the duties of the tribe of Levi, the things that they were to do to facilitate the worship of the Hebrew people during their sojourn in the wilderness, and then thereafter, once they made it into the promised land and became a permanently housed people with their own territory and their own government, etc., etc. So we are likely, we did 3 chapters last week. The 3rd chapter will be the story. I won't, if some of you aren't that familiar with what story is about to come up, I'll let you find out when we get there, and not spoil it for you. Of course, if you know the story, then you know where we are, then you know what's going to happen. But we may well get there. So, since it's about time to start, let's go ahead and bow our heads, and we'll begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for all the blessings that you grant to us. We thank you that you are not toxic, that you are a loving and supportive and caring God, that you created us out of love, that you do not desire any of us to die. You do not delight in anybody's destruction. And so we want to get to know that positive character even better through our study of the written word. And so we ask that the Holy Spirit will come close, that everybody can receive that which they're prepared to receive and to understand, and that you will have control of what is shared. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let's switch to our Friday night setup, and here is the book of Exodus, chapter 30. And the subtitle that the translators of this version put here is Plans for the Incense Altar. I like that wording because usually it's referred to as the altar of incense. Well, that construction, to say noun of adjective, although incense isn't really an adjective, but it serves that purpose, particularly here when you say the incense altar. It's the adjective and then the noun. English does its nouns and adjectives backwards to a lot of other languages. And when you think about it logically, the other languages actually make a little more sense than English. For example, if I were to talk about the great big, or the big green house, you aren't able to form much of a picture in your mind until I get to the third word in that phrase, the word house. And then your brain has to be able to hang on to the words big and green in order to apply that to the noun house that I just said, so that you can form a picture in your head of what I just said. Other languages, say Spanish, would say the, how would they put it? Casa Grande Verde. Yeah, my Spanish is probably atrocious, but they do it in that order. So the noun casa or house comes first. So instantly your brain is able to now start constructing a picture in your head, so that when I add the grande, big, and verde, green, you're able to add those and improve your picture, but you've already got the picture started. And in English, we do it backwards. It's harder to process information because the noun comes last. As in here, plans for the incense altar. The altar is the noun. That's what we're talking about. So if we reverse that in English, well then we turn it into a noun with an adjectival prepositional phrase of incense, because that makes it follow the rules of our rather awkward language. But it also adds the words, altar of incense. We've got a third word in there, whereas if you put it in this order, it says incense altar. It's less wordy. So then, as you're writing, you have to decide which is more important. And again, it'll depend on whether you're writing for the eye or writing for the ear. I spent a number of years working in radio news. In radio news, you're writing for the ear. Nobody's going to see what you write but you yourself. You're going to type it onto a sheet of paper, and you're going to pull that sheet of paper out and put it on your copyboard, and when it's time for the newscast, you're going to look at that paper and turn it into spoken words. That's the process of what you're doing there. So most people, I wish they didn't put that audio in there. Fortunately, I got it turned off so you can only hear it a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, most people who consume what you write in that situation are only going to hear it. They're never going to see it. They're just going to hear what you say when you read it back. So you have to write a little bit differently there to make it easier for them to understand. When you're writing for somebody who's going to read it, when you're writing for print, or writing for the eye, as we say, then you write a little bit differently, because you write for visual clarity, for the ease of turning that print into ideas instead of turning audio into ideas. So incense altar is probably better for print for writing for the eye, because there's fewer words, less verbiage to throw up there on the page. Altar of incense would make a little more sense when you're writing for the ear, because that gives the listener a chance to form a picture in their mind of what you're talking about as soon as you start saying the words, instead of having to wait for the last word to come through. Sorry for that lesson in grammar and syntax. That wasn't the intent there. I just happened to think of it when I saw that. So here's what the Bible text says. Then make another altar of acacia wood for burning incense. Now, recall that so far almost all the wood used in construction of this portable worship structure were acacia wood, probably chosen for its durability. In fact, just for the fun of it, let's go to my Bible dictionary here. This is an old Bible dictionary that was given to me by some people that I knew in Colorado. They were from, I think, the Georgia area, from the state of Georgia. And in fact, I think the wife, I saw something on Facebook notifications led me to believe that maybe the wife has a birthday today. She is a friend of mine on Facebook, although we almost never communicate. At any rate, I'm going to look it up in here by the name that's used in the King James, because this Bible dictionary was focused around the wording used in the King James. And we're getting there. Okay. So here's an entry about such and such a tree, or this wood, which they're calling acacia wood. This is without doubt correctly referred to some species of acacia, of which 3 or 4 kinds occur in the Bible lands. The wood of this tree, perhaps the acacia sial, is more definitely signified. Perhaps the acacia sial is more definitely signified, was extensively employed in the construction of the tabernacle. See Exodus 25:6, 36, 37, and 38, and of course even here. Even now, common in Palestine, though it has been constantly used for lumber and for making charcoal, trees are found with trunks 2 feet in diameter. In olden times, they very probably were sometimes 3 or 4 feet in diameter. The wood is close-grained and hard, of a fine yellow-brown color, and admirably adapted to cabinet work. The acacia sial is very common in some parts of the peninsula of Sinai. Of course, back then they imagined that that's where they were wandering, but at any rate, it yields the well-known substance called gum arabic, which is obtained by incisions in the bark, but it is impossible to say whether the ancient Jews were acquainted with its use. From the tangled thicket into which the stems of this tree expand, Stanley well remarks, and Stanley, I'm not sure who he's referring to here, that hence is to be traced the use of the plural form of the Hebrew noun, the singular number occurring once only in the Bible. This acacia must not be confounded with the tree popularly known by this name in England, which is a North American plant and belongs to a different genus and suborder. The true acacias belong to the order Leguminosae, suborder Mimosae. Interesting. So, if it was a close-grained, hard word suitable for cabinet work, then it makes sense that they would use that wood for construction of this portable worship structure. And so that's probably why I'm going to put a marker in there and close that up and set that aside. So, make it 18 inches square and 36 inches high, and that footnote is going to tell us that's 1 cubit square by 2 inches high, with horns essentially the equivalent of 2 stacked cubes, with horns at the corners carved from the same piece of wood as the altar itself. So there's the dimensions and a description that it will have horns at the corners, and we normally picture that as being at the top. Overlay the top, sides, and horns of the altar with pure gold, and run a gold molding around the entire altar. Make 2 gold rings and attach them on opposite sides of the altar below the gold molding to hold the carrying poles. Now, some of the furniture had 4 gold rings, but in this case, given the dimensions, it didn't really need 4. 2 would do, 1 on each side. You stick the poles through it, pick it up, and the weight. Can I get down there and turn that audio clear off? Come on. I'll just turn that audio clear down so that that isn't bothering us. I'll have to turn it back up later. I don't know why it wouldn't come up there. It used to be that the audio would come up just by clicking on that little icon. I guess Microsoft had decided easy is contrary to their commercial interests. I don't know. Anyway, so we've been talking about the 2 gold rings, the dimensions of this thing, with it being tall, meant that the bulk of the weight would be below the pole, so it wasn't really necessary to have 4 rings to balance it properly, as would be the case with, say, the Ark of the Covenant or the table of the showbread. So just 2 rings in this case. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Place the incense altar just outside the inner curtain that shields the Ark of the Covenant, in front of the Ark's cover, the place of atonement that covers the tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. I will meet with you there. So there were 2 footnotes there. Let's go ahead and run down and look at those. The Ark of the Testimony, and that covers the testimony. See the note on 25 verse 16. So, yeah, it is generally believed that the tablets of stone with the 10 Commandments inscribed on them were placed inside the Ark of the Testimony, the Ark of the Covenant, as we sometimes call it. So, okay, make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Place the incense altar just outside the inner curtain that shields the Ark of the Covenant in front of the Ark's cover, the place of atonement, that covers the tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. I will meet with you there. Now, that is an interesting way to put it, and I want to read that in another version simply because by tradition we place the Ark of the Covenant inside the holy place, not inside the most holy place. But the language there, to me at least, isn't entirely clear. It just says outside the inner curtain. Well, from what perspective are you saying outside? So here in the NIV it says, put the altar in front of the curtain that is before the Ark of the Testimony, before the atonement cover that is over the testimony, where I will meet with you. All right, a more literal version, the New American Standard Bible. Let's check that one as well. And it says, and you shall put this altar in front of the veil that is near the Ark of the Testimony, in front of the mercy seat that is over the Ark of the Testimony, where I will meet with you. Now, as I say, by tradition, most artists will place the Ark of the Covenant inside the holy place, right up by the curtain. And in fact, if you'll recall, we looked at a 3D rendering that somebody made last week. And there, that's where it was. It was in the holy place, not inside the room. However, back more than a year ago, I'm sure, when we read the book of Hebrews, the book of Hebrews places 2 items of furniture in each room. So the candlestick and the table of showbread were in the holy place, and the altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant were in the most holy place. And I would have to say, having read this in these versions now, that I can't say for sure that this is saying to put it in the holy place. It sounds like it's saying to put it in the most holy place. And in fact, it is possible that the original intent was for this altar, this item of furniture, to be placed in the most holy place. And that events that we will read about later in this book, I think it's later in this book, will change what was being done, and it might be that event that changes the location of the altar of incense, the incense altar, from inside the most holy place to just outside the most holy place, right there in front of the veil. Either way, it's right next to that veil. So, reading on, every morning when Aaron maintains the lamps, he must burn fragrant incense on the altar. Now, this is why most people put it in the holy place, because something was to be done there every day. And we know later, and we will read about it here in this chapter, I believe, a little bit later, that the high priest didn't go into the most holy place every day. He only did that once a year. So anyway, and like I say, maybe it had to be moved at that point because of the restrictions that are going to arrive later. Every morning when Aaron maintains the lamps, he must burn fragrant incense on the altar. And each evening when he lights the lamps, he must again burn incense in the Lord's presence. This must be done from generation to generation. Do not offer any unholy incense on this altar, or any burnt offerings, grain offerings, or liquid offerings. So this was specifically for incense only. Any other offerings are to be offered in the courtyard, outside this room. I suppose somebody could turn that into a spiritual lesson, what God doesn't want done right there in his sanctuary. And let's face it, our offerings to God these days are based on our system of commerce. Most people, when they bring gifts to God, they bring money, the instrument of exchange in our system of commerce. And we have said in the past that God allows that, but it is not his ideal, and he views our system of commerce with reserve, shall we say. It's not his ideal, it's not the way he intended humanity to work. So it should not be close to our worship of him. And in fact, I've seen churches that will put the offering outside the sanctuary meeting room itself to separate this commerce from the worship service, and then they don't have a formal offering time in the service. You could pass judgment on that one way or the other, depends on your opinions and so forth. I'm not going to say one's right and another's wrong. That's just what some congregations have chosen to do. But I think the offerings were to be offered outside the holy place suggests that these things are not holy in the sense that what's in this room is. Once a year, I did say that once a year it would come up. Once a year, Aaron must purify the altar by smearing its horns with blood from the offering made to purify the people from their sin. And I like that wording, purify the people from their sin. We need to be cleansed of our sin. It needs to be removed like you remove dirt when you're washing. Then it says, this will be a regular annual event from generation to generation, for this is the Lord's most holy altar. So he went to the altar daily and burnt incense on it, but then once a year, he actually smeared the horns with blood. Out of the NIV, once a year Aaron shall make atonement on its horns. This annual atonement must be made with the blood of the atoning sin offering for the generations to come. It is most holy to the Lord. So yeah, this version is replacing, in that footnote D probably will tell us that they're replacing make atonement for, that they're making that interpretation. But atonement is an English word that was made up in order originally to translate the Hebrew being used here. And I think it was John Wycliffe, the English Bible translator, who did very early work in providing the Bible in English and suffered the wrath of the established church for having done so, who made the decision to make up a word, since he couldn't find a good English word to render the meaning of the Hebrew. So he took two simple English words, at and one, and jammed them together, at one, atone. And the other meanings of atone thereafter have been brought up by our religious traditions and not by the meaning of the Hebrew or the original meaning of the English, which is simply reconciliation, atone. And that's why I like this version's purify us from our sin, because that's what needs to happen to reconcile us to God, because otherwise God would destroy us. Not by intent, but by natural result. Money for the tabernacle. Then the Lord said to Moses, whenever you take a census of the people of Israel, each man who is counted must pay a ransom for himself to the Lord. Then no plague will strike the people as you count them. Each person who is counted must give a small piece of silver as a sacred offering to the Lord. This payment is half a shekel, based on the sanctuary shekel, which equals 20 gerahs. So the sanctuary shekel equals 20 gerahs. He's offering half a shekel, or 10 gerahs. And let's see if the footnote adds this. 0.2 ounces, or about 6 grams. All right. Interesting. All who have reached their 20th birthday, generally in our country the age of majority is 18. However, there are states where 21 is the age before which you're not allowed to drink alcohol. In fact, I was interesting. Where was I? Okay. I was at the grocery store, and there was a younger person there on the staff who was talking to an older person. They were talking about what he could and couldn't do based on his age and the presence of alcohol. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you are, our county in the last year switched from being a dry county to being a wet county. So now all the grocery stores have booze on the shelves. At any rate, they were talking about that, and I just pointed out to them that when I was 20, I took a job at a restaurant in Colorado. And as part of that job, I could carry cases of beer from the truck into the basement where it was stored. That was allowed. And there were even younger workers who worked at that restaurant who were part of the crew that would unload these trucks and whole cases of beer. Yeah, you could carry a whole case of beer when you were less than 21. However, when I would work as a busboy upstairs in the main restaurant, I didn't do that very often, but I did it a few times. I would clean everything off the table except for the empty alcohol glasses. I was not allowed to touch those. The waitresses who were 21 and older had to come take those away because I was at 20 underage. Anyway, so here we're reading to some extent the age of majority when it came to the tax here, the temple tax that was done whenever people were counted. This age of majority was 20. All who have reached their 20th birthday must give this sacred offering to the Lord. When this offering is given to the Lord to purify your lives, or to make atonement for you, making you right with Him, and that's at footnote F, we've already seen that, the rich must not give more than the specified amount, and the poor must not give less. Receive this ransom money from the Israelites and use it for the care of the tabernacle. It will bring the Israelites to the Lord's attention, and it will purify your lives, or make atonement for you. So, What, what's this about? Wait a minute, everybody has to pay the same. The rich are not to give more, the poor are not to give less. Don't most of the time we give our offerings to the Lord on the basis of a percentage? In fact, some denominations still teach tithing, which is 10% of your income. So the rich person gives a whole lot more than the poor person because that tithe is greater for them. It's a percentage. But in this case, it's not a percentage, it's a specific amount, and the rich and poor pay the same alike. What's going on there? Well, recall that this is ransom money. Ransoming ourselves to the Lord, or from the Lord, if you wish. The Lord gave us life. If we wish to use it on our own, then we give something of value to God to attain that. There's a word I want to use, and it's gone out of my head. That agency, I guess, is the term I wanted to use. The ability to make that decision. Now, in reality, God grants us total freedom. But in this system, it's a ransom to buy ourselves from the Lord, and every person pays exactly the same, because before God, we all have the same value. One person is not more valuable because he's rich. Another person is not less valuable because he or she is poor. Each person pays the same amount when you are counting the people, this specific temple tax. And this may well be of the temple tax that is spoken of in the New Testament when Peter Hello.
Good morning.
Hi. Did you decide you wanted to join us?
Yeah, I did, but can you pause and come in here for a moment first?
Yeah, just a moment. So, brief interlude there to take care of some things. They've been taken care of, and we're ready to proceed. And my wife is with us on the phone so that she can interject if she thinks of something. At any rate, I was making the point.
Don't think of anything. I didn't interject.
Yeah. We were making the point that this atonement money, this ransom offering, taken anytime there was a census, this money was the same from everybody because it's a count. How many people are there? Each person has the same value before God. Rich people aren't more valuable to God, poor people aren't less valuable before God, and vice versa. Poor people aren't more valuable to God and rich people less valuable. That's not true either. Reading on then. Plans for the wash basin. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Make a bronze wash basin with a bronze stand. Place it between the tabernacle and the altar, and fill it with water. Aaron and his sons will wash their hands and feet there. They must wash with water whenever they go into the tabernacle to appear before the Lord, and when they approach the altar to burn up their special gifts to the Lord, or they will die. They must always wash their hands and feet, or they will die. This is a permanent law for Aaron and his descendants, to be observed from generation to generation." So, and this supports what we were saying just a little bit earlier, that we don't die because God desires to destroy, that he's just waiting for a chance to wipe us out because he's mad at us. No. This is a case that God's powerful and perfectly pure presence is a consuming fire that consumes sin. And if we come into his presence contaminated with sin, we will get destroyed along with the sin that is bound up in us. So we must be purified before we appear in the presence of this holy God. Not because God has evil intent against us, but just because of the natural consequences of our sinful condition. And that's what this element is pointing out. The washing up signified the removal or purification from sin. And so they washed their hands and feet every time that they performed their duties in this worship structure. When they processed the offerings, when they burned the portions of the animals that were to be burned, in some cases the whole animal, but those things that were to be burned on the altar. Then the Lord said to Moses, collect choice spices, 12.5 pounds of pure myrrh, 6.25 pounds of fragrant cinnamon, 6.25 pounds of fragrant calamus, and 12.5 pounds of cassia, as measured by the weight of the sanctuary shekel. Also get 1 gallon of olive oil. Now I read those two verses together because all of those measurements are footnoted. We'll go down and read the footnotes once we get done with the verse. So the 500 shekels, or 5.7 kilograms of pure myrrh, 250 shekels, or 2.9 kilograms of fragrant cinnamon, 250 shekels of fragrant calamus. So the same things. And then that would be 500 shekels of cassia, and then 1 hin, or about 3.8 liters of olive oil, very close to the English gallon. So this is clearly an American translation because Americans still use the English measurements. I think England still uses the imperial measurements, but the imperial gallon is different from the gallon we use in the United States. So, but yeah, England has always wanted to be a little bit separate from the rest of Europe, as noted by Brexit and so forth. So, the metric system, which would otherwise make a lot of sense, oh no, we can't do that. We've got to have our traditional measurements. So they were to take these spices, these fragrant elements, and mix them. With oil to prepare a special oil. Like a skilled incense maker, blend these ingredients to make a holy anointing oil. Use this sacred oil to anoint the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the table and all its utensils, the lampstand and all its accessories, the incense altar, the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, and the wash basin with its stand. Consecrate them to make them absolutely holy. After this, whatever touches them will also become holy. So they sanctified, if you wish, these items through the use of this oil. This is all ceremonial, of course, not reality. And thus, ceremonially, whatever touched them, the offerings placed on them, became holy as well. And as I say, again, this isn't reality stuff. This is just ceremonial. We have these ceremonies, and God's telling them to do this, so God has a use for ceremony, as long as we understand it's not reality. There's nothing. You don't.
Baptism is a ceremony that we could look at and understand what you mean by it being ceremonial only. because baptism, when you go under the water and you come back up, it signifies that you died and been reborn. But you're still just as much alive when you're under the water as when you, in reality,
Right.
you don't literally die.
There's no magic or mysticism in the baptism. It's just a symbol. Yeah. So there is value to the symbolism and the ceremony, but it isn't automatic and it isn't bound up in the physical act that you take. The value is in the reality of your submission of yourself to God and your commitment to Him. That's where the value is. And that we talk about as taking place at the ceremony, but in fact it actually takes place in reality in your own mind. And so these things, you know, purification from sin takes place when the Holy Spirit does its work in our characters and transforms them, as it says in Romans 12, verse 2. So we are being.
We thought that baptism is like magic eraser ink. You got a list. There's a book up in heaven that has your name on it, and in that book is a list of every sinful act you've done. So if you want to get rid of those sins, all you have to do is take this magical dunk called baptism, and voila, your sins that were in that book are now erased.
Yeah, there's a scene in the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where one of the escapees finds some people lining up for baptism and joins the line and gets himself baptized. And he says, "See there, I'm all in the clear now. I've been forgiven." As if just being dunked like that has any value with the laws of the state, but in his mind it did anyway. So yeah, these things are all ceremonial, but there is value to the ceremonies as they illustrate to us the reality of our relationship with our Creator. Reading on, verse 30. Anoint Aaron and his sons also, consecrating them to serve me as priests. And say to the people of Israel, this holy anointing oil is reserved for me from generation to generation. It must never be used to anoint anyone else, and you must never make any blend like it for yourselves. It is holy, and you must treat it as holy. Anyone who makes a blend like it or anoints someone other than a priest will be cut off from the community. In other words, the community, the club. You can't stay in the club if you don't keep its rules. Then the Lord said to Moses, gather fragrant spices, resin droplets, mollusk shell, and galbanum, and mix these fragrant spices with pure frankincense, weighed out in equal amounts. Using the usual techniques of the incense maker, blend the spices together and sprinkle them with salt to produce a pure and holy incense. Grind some of this mixture into a very fine powder and put it in front of the Ark of the Covenant, where I will meet with you in the tabernacle. You must treat this incense as most holy. Never use this formula to make this incense for yourselves. It is reserved for the Lord, and you must treat it as holy. Anyone who makes incense like this for personal use will be cut off from the community. So, there were the descriptions of the holy anointing oil and the incense. These things were to be used only in their worship of the Creator and not in everyday life. And I want to make a comment about this, but I haven't really thought it out carefully. I have in the past. There is an interpretation of this that says that we need to make a distinction between the common and the holy. And I would argue that the common is those things that are not fully approved by God, namely government, religion, and commerce. Those three things that we've identified as being necessary because of our sinful condition, but not part of our future when sin has been eradicated. And so these things need to be kept separate from our genuine worship. And you say, well, religion is about worship, isn't it? Well, you have to understand what we mean by religion in that sense. It's religion as a formalized approach to personal devotion. The personal devotion, the actual worship, that's important. The religion often gets in the way of genuine worship by putting too much emphasis on the ceremony and the symbols and so on, the rites and rituals. The church is
not God.
What's that?
The church is not God.
No. Well,
it's an organization run by sinful humans.
Literally speaking, the church is the community of believers. The church is the people. You are God's temple. The organization, we call it the church, but it's just an organization, and it might be an organization of people who have truly committed themselves to God and therefore are the church. But the organization itself is just that, just an organization formed to take care of the business of the people who come to worship. I had thought we'd get 3 chapters today, but I'm looking at my timing here and thinking we might not. Oh well. We get to it when we get to it. Then the Lord said to Moses, chapter 31, "Look, I have specifically chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, grandson of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God, giving him great wisdom, ability, and expertise in all kinds of crafts. He is a master craftsman, expert in working with gold, silver, and bronze. He is skilled in engraving and mounting gemstones and in carving wood. He is a master at every craft. And I have personally appointed Aholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, to be his assistant. Moreover, I have given special skill to all the gifted craftsmen, so they can make all the things I have commanded you to make." And then we get to a list. The tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark's cover, the place of atonement, all the furnishings of the tabernacle, the table and its utensils, the pure gold lampstand with all its accessories, the incense altar, the altar of burnt offering with all its utensils, the wash basin with its stand, the beautifully stitched garments, the sacred garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments for his sons to wear as they minister as priests, the anointing oil, the fragrant incense for the holy place. The craftsman must make everything as I have commanded you. So God makes a choice here, and he has gifted them, but that gifting is likely a case of the circumstances of their birth and the circumstances of their early life that put them in a situation where they could learn these skills. Now, we know the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt. However, it is likely that they used these slaves for all sorts of levels of labor, that they weren't all just the lowest level brute force laborers, that where there were people among the Hebrews who had the intelligence and inclination to learn these craftsman skills of metalworking and so forth, that they would teach them these skills and use them, again, as slave labor to do these more intricate tasks. And so there were people amongst the recently freed Hebrews who had the necessary skills to carry out the work of preparing this portable worship structure, this tabernacle. So we have these two people, Bezalel son of Uri and Aholiab son of Ahisamach. So we have the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Dan represented in the craftsmen who were to take the lead in preparing this structure and all these items that as God had commanded Moses to do. The Lord then gave these instructions to Moses. Tell the people of Israel, be careful to keep my Sabbath day, for the Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between you, me, and you, from generation to generation. It is given so you may know that I am Yahweh who makes you holy. How does he make you holy? Through purification, through removing your sin. You must keep the Sabbath day, for it is a holy day for you. Anyone who desecrates it must be put to death. Anyone who works on that day will be cut off from the community. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day must be a Sabbath day of complete rest, a holy day dedicated to the Lord, or to Yahweh. Anyone who works on the Sabbath must be put to death. So they've
I don't believe that's an arbitrary number.
What number?
7.
No.
God just picked the number 7 out of the air.
No, he designed this for a weekly structure. That's been clear because there have been attempts to make a week other than 7 days, and it doesn't work for humans. Humans don't work well with a week that's not 7 days.
Yeah, when I worked in the hospital, I was on a flexible schedule, and it is difficult to not get your rest on every 7 days.
Yeah. Now it's interesting here because it says two things about people who work on the Sabbath day. In verse 14, anyone who desecrates it must be put to death. Anyone who works on that day will be cut off from the community. In other words, you can't be part of the club if you don't keep its rules. But then we get to verse 16, verse 15, it says, anyone who works on the Sabbath must be put to death. The people of Israel must keep the Sabbath day by observing it from generation to generation. This is a covenant obligation for all time. It is a permanent sign of my covenant with the people of Israel.
Now, wait a minute. If you work on the Sabbath, then your neighbor has permission to murder you. That doesn't sound loving.
No, it doesn't. Well, this whole idea of death penalties does not sound loving, does it?
No, it doesn't. Could
But
it be something along the lines of, if you work on the Sabbath, then you're breaking health protocols, and you're damaging your body, which will lead to death.
Well, that's one thing. Here's another take that somebody has put on. I'm not saying this is right. I have come since then to treat what this man says with a bit of skepticism. But he pointed out that in that culture, even today, the death penalty gets used rather liberally, and in fact, a shopkeeper and, according to you, all his employees were killed,
Yeah.
executed, for displaying tomatoes and celery next to each other, which in their mind might make somebody think of male genitalia. Therefore, it was an unspeakable, horrible violation, and they had to be executed for this crime. How was God to impress the people that he was serious about this if he didn't make this this allowance for the culture that they're growing up in? Like I say, I'm not saying that's what it is. That's just one explanation. But like you say, if you are living outside of God's design, you are destroying yourself, and that's not God wanting to kill you. That's just the natural results of the poor choices that you make.
This also the way it's written may also be a translation thing.
Might be. Now, verse 17 says something, and this is interesting. It is a permanent sign of my covenant with the people of Israel. Now that supports the contention of some people that the Sabbath was specially for the Hebrew people, or as they would say today, it was for the Jews, and not for all the people of the world. And this verse tends to support that by saying that it's a sign of God's covenant with the people of Israel. Now, it then goes on to say, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, but on the seventh day he stopped working and was refreshed. And that's obviously a reference to the creation story in the book of Genesis. Well, were only the Jews created at that point, or was everybody created then? So you have different viewpoints of the meaning of the Sabbath on that basis. When the Lord finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant, written by the finger of God. Now, we read about this back in chapter 24, when Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's 4 sons, along with the 70 elders of Israel, went to meet God, and they saw God on a pavement of stone. They saw God, and they had a festival. They ate and drank, and then they came back to be part of the rest of the people. And it is there that it says that God would take tablets of stone, and some people interpret that the stone, meaning the pavement of stone that they saw beneath God there. And that these are the tablets then that were inscribed and written by the finger of God. And so the Hebrew for that verse says, verse 18, the 2 tablets of the testimony, see the note on 25:16, generally believed to be the words of the 10 Commandments, written by the finger of God on these tablets of stone. We've got around 20 minutes. Can we do this story in about 20 minutes? Well, we're going to try. Now, so far, since chapter 24, we have read, for about 8 chapters, we have read Moses and God discussing the plans for this portable worship structure that was going to be overlaid with pure gold and have all these precious stones involved and have all this intricate work in the textiles that were to be used. A highly valuable thing. When the people saw how long it was taking Moses to come back down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron. Come on, they said, make us some gods who can lead us. We don't know what happened to this fellow Moses who brought us here from the land of Egypt. Now, a word about that. Moses got a leadership role. Moses had the skill set God used to oversee his liberation of his people. But Moses didn't do it. Moses didn't cause the plagues. Moses didn't change Pharaoh's mind. Pharaoh did that, although the events that God allowed to take place influenced that. But it wasn't Moses. He's just the figurehead. He's kind of like the British royalty. The British royalty has no real governmental power. That's all vested in Parliament and the Prime Minister and so forth. They're just figureheads. But in this case, Moses was the figurehead who took the blame when the people got upset. And they said, Moses brought us here from the land of Egypt. Well, no, God did, not Moses. But you're blaming Moses. And you are outside of an understanding of your Creator and his omnipresence. So you don't have a relationship with your Creator that will give you the solace you need at this point in your life. And so you're focusing on Moses as the leader God chose and saying he's the one that's doing all this. And now that we don't have him, we don't know what's going on. We need gods who can lead us. Now, we could discuss for a long time where Aaron was in what's going on here. Was he just acquiescing to the pressure of the crowd? Or was he partially involved? Did he perhaps share in their sentiments to some degree? We'll hear what he tells his brother later, which is going to be absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, so Aaron said, take the gold rings from the ears of your wives and sons and daughters and bring them to me. Now, they'd already, well, actually, they hadn't already. God had ordered it. It hadn't happened yet. They were supposed to be using these things to make offerings for this worship structure, but they haven't done it yet. So Aaron says, well, you've got all this gold that you plundered from the Egyptians when you left the land. Bring it to me. So the people brought this stuff. They took the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then Aaron took the gold, melted it down, and molded it into the shape of a calf. When the people saw it, they exclaimed, "Oh, Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Notice they're using plural there instead of singular. And now they're saying, oh, it wasn't Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt. It was the gods that we are imagined or represented by these calves. Now, why a calf? Why not a pig? Why not a giraffe or I'm just trying to think of some wild out there animal, or a dog, or armadillo.
Or snake.
Why a calf? Well, what was their diet? I mean, they were in a wilderness. There would not have been a lot of agriculture and grains and so forth for them to eat. So what did they eat? Well, they ate the manna, but on top of the manna, then their diet was largely the protein from their animals. And there were two species of animals, three if you probably, that were the livestock from which they gathered their meat, and that would have been the bovine, the sheep, and the goat. And so this calf, this infant bovine, represented the source of their nutrition. Kind of like sun worship. Sun worshipers worship that which they perceive, and in reality provides them with the things they need for life, sustenance, with food. The sun makes that possible. We know that. The sun provides the energy that the plants use to convert the carbon dioxide and the nutrients of the soil into the structure of the plants, which we then eat. And the sun also provides for the weather cycles that provide rain to water the ground to help these plants to grow. The sun makes all of this happen. If you focus on what you need, then you worship that which provides it, the sun, without recognizing that God created the sun. God created the system that does all this. So ultimately, all of this comes from the Creator, not from something the Creator made. But in this case, their food came from the bovine, so they make an image of a bovine and they worship that. Now, I wonder if Aaron actually molded the gold into this calf, or if in fact some of the other people who had learned metalworking skills in Egypt did the actual work of this, but Aaron takes the credit because he's the one who authorized it. I would guess the latter. Aaron saw how excited the people were, so he built an altar in front of the calf. Then he announced, "Tomorrow will be a festival to Yahweh." The people got up early the next morning to sacrifice burnt offerings and peace offerings. After this, they celebrated with feasting and drinking, and they indulged in pagan revelry. How does the King James put that, just for the fun of it? Because I think there's a specific word used there. And we are in what, chapter 32 now? Yeah, verse 6. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. That's how the King James translated it. NIV, just for the fun of it. Having trouble turning a single page there. Verse 6. Yes. So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to engage in revelry. Now most, not necessarily most, but a lot of interpreters believed that this involved sexual behavior. And that was the worship tradition of the culture around them. It was probably something that happened in Egypt. So you're going to have a big festival to God. You're going to do what feels good, and that involves eating and carousing, to use that term. So that's what they did. The Lord told Moses, quick, go down the mountain. Your people, interesting that God's using this terminology now, whom you brought from the land of Egypt, interesting that God's saying it that way, have corrupted themselves. How quickly they have turned away from the way I commanded them to live. They have melted down gold and made a calf, and they have bowed down and sacrificed to it. They are saying, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And then the Lord said, I have seen how stubborn and rebellious these people are. Now leave me alone so my fierce anger can blaze against them, and I will destroy them. Then I will make you, Moses, into a great nation. Now, is God saying that he intends to wipe out his people? Even if he does it through the natural means of showing up in their presence while they are tied up with sin, so that when his presence destroys sin, it destroys them as well as a natural result. Still, is that what God is suggesting here? Has he not placed a barrier between himself and his people so that that won't happen? Or is he testing Moses? Because he said, well, I've had it with these people, Moses. If I show up there now, they're all going to die. And if I do that, I could take you, I could make you into a great nation. You could become the Abraham of my chosen people. But Moses tried to pacify the Lord his God. Oh Lord, he said, why are you so angry with your own people whom you brought from the land of Egypt with such great power and such a strong hand? So Moses is doing two things here. He is correcting God about who freed the people from Egypt. And he's also saying, wait a minute. I don't think this is the right way to go, God. Why let the Egyptians say their God rescued them with the evil intention of slaughtering them in the mountains and wiping them from the face of the earth? Turn away from your fierce anger. Now Moses is following Abraham by interceding for the people in the face of a God who's testing him with threats of violence. Change your mind about this terrible disaster. Repent, in other words. You have threatened against your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You bound yourself with an oath to them, saying, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give them all of this land that I have promised to your descendants, and they will possess it forever. Now, Jacob has a footnote A. I'm going to guess that the Hebrew says Israel there. Yeah, Hebrew says Israel. The names Jacob and Israel are often interchanged throughout the Old Testament, referring sometimes to the individual patriarch and sometimes to the nation. So in that case, I think it pretty clearly referred to the individual because it was in the context of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the Lord repented or changed his mind about the terrible disaster he had threatened to bring on his people. I think we can interpret this as a test of Moses. God is going to demonstrate the character of Moses, that he is not so self-inflated that he thinks it would be a good idea to become Abraham to a new chosen people of God. And he is following in Abraham's footsteps by interceding with God. Then Moses turned and went down the mountain. He held in his hands the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. Or, get my cursor over here so we can scroll that. Footnote B, the 2 tablets of the testimony. All right. Here we are. These, they were inscribed on both sides, front and back. They're almost never pictured that way, but it's quite clear here that the inscription went on both sides of each tablet. These tablets were God's work. The words on them were written by God Himself. So both the tablets and the words were God's work. When Joshua heard the boisterous noise of the people shouting below them, he exclaimed to Moses, "It sounds like war in the camp." But Moses replied, "No, it's not a shout of victory or the wailing of defeat. I hear the sound of a celebration." When they came near the camp, Moses saw the calf and the dancing, and he burned with anger. He threw the stone tablets to the ground, smashing them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf they had made and burned it. Then he ground it into powder, threw it into the water, and forced the people to drink it. Did Moses just throw a tantrum here? Are you there?
Yeah, I was just trying to envision that while you were describing it, reading it, whatever you were doing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is not a good representation of the way God acts.
No, it isn't. Moses was irate. He saw this. He kind of lost his head. His limbic brain took over because he'd gotten triggered. And so now he's not acting rationally. He's acting emotionally. And so he throws these stone tablets, the very work of God, to the ground and smashes them. And then he burns the calf. Well, you burn gold, it's just going to melt. And then he grinds the melted gold into powder, adds that to the water, which is going to turn the water red, and then he makes the people drink it. I'm not sure. Is gold toxic? I think it might be. At any rate, he made them drink it. I'm sure it tasted horrid. Finally, he turned to Aaron and demanded, "What did these people do to you to make you bring such terrible sin upon them?" Now listen to his brother's lame response. "Don't get so upset, my lord," Aaron replied. "You yourself know how evil these people are. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will lead us.' We don't know what happened to this fellow Moses who brought us here from the land of Egypt. So I told them, 'Whoever has gold jewelry, take it off.' When they brought it to me, I simply threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." Really, Aaron, you're expecting your brother to believe that tall tale? Earlier it said that you molded the gold into the calf. Now we have suggested that may not be the case, that you instructed that it be done. But the earlier narrative places responsibility for this on Aaron, and now Aaron tells his brother, "Well, I tossed all this gold into the fire and this calf walked out." Huh?
Look at why Aaron might think that's a valid excuse, that he could get away with that. Go back in the story to when he and Moses were standing in front of Pharaoh. Wasn't Aaron somehow involved in a staff turning to snakes?
Yes, I believe he was.
I'm forgetting the story, but I'm thinking he had some involvement there.
He threw down his staff, and his staff turned into a snake, I believe, is the way it
Was
went.
it Aaron or was it Moses that did that? Now, if that literally happened, then Aaron was there and saw it happen, and he might think that he could get away with claiming supernatural occurrences once again.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Exodus 7, verse 10. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Yes, you're exactly right. Aaron was involved in that. He's the one that threw down his staff, and it was his staff that became a snake in that situation. So, yeah, maybe that's what he thought.
You know?
When you are being held...
I just threw my stick down and it became a snake.
Yeah.
Well, Moses was there and witnessed it, so he thought he could get away with it again. Well, me, I just threw the gold into the fire and out comes this calf.
Yeah. It is typical of humans when trying to avoid responsibility for their choices and actions to come up with ridiculous and lame excuses. So,
save himself.
Yeah. So Aaron's acting like a human being. Surprise, surprise. I'll bet you he was one. Moses saw that Aaron had let the people get completely out of control, much to the amusement of their enemies, footnote C, out of control, and they mocked anyone who opposed them. The meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. All right. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and shouted, all of you who are on the Lord's side, come here and join me. And all the Levites gathered around him. Well, it's what you would expect. His kinsmen, the members of his tribe, they joined him. Moses told them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each of you take your swords and go back and forth from one end of the camp to the other. Kill everyone, even your brothers, friends, and neighbors. The Levites obeyed Moses' command, and about 3,000 people died that day. Now, we're talking about a crowd of possibly 1.5 million, close to 1 million anyway. 3,000 is a very small number. There must have been some designation we don't read about here about who should have been killed. And this is, again, probably Moses still being irate and irrational. Then Moses told the Levites, today you have ordained yourselves for the service of the Lord, for you obeyed him, even though it meant killing your own sons and brothers. Today you have earned a blessing. Footnote D. Yeah, as in the Greek and Latin versions, the Hebrew reads, today ordain yourselves. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the Greek and Latin, the Greek would have been the ones done by the Jews in Egypt, and then the Latin would have been the Vulgate translation. The next day, Moses said to the people, you have committed a terrible sin, but I will go back up to the Lord on the mountain. Perhaps I will be able to obtain forgiveness or to make atonement for your sin. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, oh, what a terrible sin these people have committed. They have made gods of gold for themselves. But now, if you will only forgive their sin, but if not, erase my name from the record you have written. But the Lord replied to Moses, no, I will erase the name of everyone who has sinned against me. Now go, lead the people to the place I told you about. Look, my angel will lead the way before you, and when I come to call the people to account, I will certainly hold them responsible for their sins." Then the Lord sent a great plague upon the people because they had worshipped the calf Aaron had made. Or he abandoned them to the natural results of their choices because the feasting and the revelry probably weren't entirely healthy. And we have gone a little bit over, but it allowed us to finish this chapter. So we thank you for joining us, and we will go on with the record of the book of Exodus next week. And until then, we say goodbye and God bless.
Night, everyone.